the main difference between book and film for me, when it comes to the games themselves, is the limited POV of Katniss in the book makes it so everything that's going on outside of it, she's guessing at what's going on. She's guessing why they're making these changes. The gamekeepers we hear about the sponsors. All of this she's interpreting, but we're locked in her perspective, so we only see the end result of these actions. And so it leaves enough room for us to fill in a lot of details, and like my imagination is going wild, figuring out like how these things come to be, why they're making certain decisions. In the movie, we are shown all of this.
Welcome, friends, to episode 292 of the Ink the Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss Gary Ross's 2012 film, The Hunger Games. Okay, so I'm feeling very thankful. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving if you do celebrate that. We're here at the Hunger Games film.
Yeah, I volunteer as tribute. I don't know about you.
I guess I will. I don't know what I'm fighting for, but I guess my life.
I guess my life.
That's good enough. But this movie reminds me of a very specific time, interesting time for YA. Twilight had done very well, obviously Harry Potter. And this movie comes at a time where like they had this smaller budget that they had to pull this off with, but then they have these massive names in some of these roles, and it's got like a lot of that momentum from YA going for it that I think this hit it squarely and perfectly. And I was reading that this is like the 21st most successful franchise of all time.
Yeah.
If you can believe that.
Well, speaking of that new movie, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I think it's called.
Yeah.
It's doing great. Apparently, it's killing it. It's another it's just quietly this massive franchise, and clearly still has legs. I was speaking to someone recently who went and saw it and enjoyed it. So it's like it's still got fans out there who are going to see these things.
I think you leave something like this alone for 10 years, and there's like a certain interest that could peak up again. Also.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I don't know much about it either, so I'd be interested to see where it goes. But I did find myself with this movie being like, I could watch a couple more of these movies. I kind of want to continue the story.
Yeah, same. I kind of want to finish out the trilogy now. It kind of reignited a little bit of interest just out of curiosity. Where does this thing end up going? Snow, who is a lot more President Snow, who is a lot more present in this version of the Hunger Games. So in the book, I thought it was notable that he wasn't very present. He showed up a couple times to say a few things, but really didn't have much time on the page. Whereas I think projecting ahead and knowing they were going to make multiple movies, they smartly show more of him, show a lot of interactions that we're not privy to in the book. And that's one of the big changes that we can highlight from the beginning is how much more of that other stuff we get, how much more outside of just Katniss's perspective that we do get in this version.
Yeah, it's like a major factor. President Snow as Donald Sutherland, right? If you get Donald Sutherland in a role like this, you want to show him more. I read that Gary Ross actually added in multiple scenes, and he worked alongside Billy Ray and also Suzanne Collins to craft this screenplay. And apparently Donald Sutherland pitched him on the idea of playing this President Snow role. I guess he felt there was something like Shakespearean about it, something that was speaking to him as sort of this villainous character with maybe a darker past, something that
Isn't
led
it
him
interesting
to
that the prequel is all about him? Like a young him is the protagonist of this prequel.
Again, I don't remember books 2 and 3 or really the movies. I do remember the second movie. I remember thinking the second movie was actually pretty great.
Yeah.
But not knowing where it goes, why would someone want to see a prequel about this character? Because he seems so detestable. Yeah,
he's pretty bad in this movie. I mean, he's like, have you seen those underdogs? You wouldn't root for him if you did, he says some pretty shitty stuff about people. Give him a little bit of hope, but not too much.
Yeah, very evil corporate overlord. I'm
thinking I would love to see a prequel about Haymitch. Now maybe he shows up in some fashion, but like I want to see Haymitch in the games, not Snow. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. He's probably my favorite character. Again, like I loved him in the book, but he's great here in the movie too.
And Woody Harrelson in the role. I guess Woody
Yeah.
Harrelson had to be convinced to play this role. He didn't want it. He kept turning it away. And then apparently Gary Ross reports that Woody Harrelson always thanks him for getting him into the role, because it was just kind of one of those super iconic roles.
Yeah, I mean I mean, Woody Harrelson has some iconic roles, but I'm sure this is a good one for broad appeal and getting recognized, and probably got more roles because of this one. You know what I mean? Like he's a likable guy, whereas I think Woody Harrelson often plays, I don't know, morally gray characters at best, if not villainous. He does have like a goofy side where sometimes he's more likable, but I don't know. I just think he really kills this role. We got the Tooch shows up here, Stanley Tucci.
God, I love Stanley Tucci.
So charismatic.
I appreciate Stanley Tucci as a human being. I want to be like Stanley Tucci. He's so fascinating. He's so magnetic. Like this role again is like, of course, like way over the top, and the motivation of these characters in the Capitol is really messed up when you start extrapolating and thinking about it, as we have. But he
plays it with a little bit of like, he kind of like, I don't know. There's a little bit of this in the book where like he genuinely tries to help them out in the book and tries to make them more appealing because he knows that will help them in the games.
Right.
There's a little bit of that sorrow, and that's one of the more fascinating things that Suzanne Collins did, and I'll give her credit, and then it's translated here on screen, is have characters like Cesar Flickerman, which is who Tucci plays, and of course Effie Trinket. Yeah. And like both of these characters could have been very flat villains type characters who are just completely out of touch. But both of them have redeeming qualities to them.
And talk about iconic, like Elizabeth Banks as Effie Trinket is like been memed all over the place. It's such an iconic role, and the costuming and everything about that.
Great costuming. I wanted to say, like, there is a little bit of the like now pretty cliche evil empire, stormtrooper like characters, and then like everybody's in drab clothes, like they're not allowed to have any color in the all the districts. It's a little cliche at this point, sure. I'm okay with a little bit of cliche when it comes to YA, because I feel like you're appealing to a young audience who probably isn't as overexposed as adults are to this same stuff. So you have to like calibrate for that. Like it's probably not as cliche to them. All that being said, when she walks out in that bright pink, pinkish purple or whatever it is, like with that, with her hair and her makeup, and like that dissonance between everything else you're seeing and her just makes it stand out all the more, right?
I was getting a lot more like Third Reich vibes from the era that they're trying to depict in some ways. Obviously the tech doesn't match that, like the Capitol's tech is so far advanced, but like the microphone, the way the banners are there, like red, like the symbols are all there, and it just does look very like totalitarian,
fascism, right?
Kind of fascist.
It's this projection of fascism, and one of the things I wanted to get into about this that I find kind of interesting about the way this fascist society is portrayed is how, at its core, there is also the elites in the city who are out of touch with the common man. The people who just like benefit from the blue collar labor and are just sitting there in their ivory towers. There's a little bit of that going on, which is usually pretty counter to what you see in sort of anti-fascist dystopian fiction that's about taking down fascism. It's interesting that they tie the fascism to that here. And it muddies the waters a bit for me, right? I don't know how to feel about it personally. But I mean, that's all going to depend on how people feel. Like, of course, that is like a valid criticism you could point at people, where often they are very disconnected from the work being done that provides a lot of the value to them. But there's like all kinds of, different sides to that argument. And it's just interesting here to see it played up. And I do think that created a broad appeal to where even middle America, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people can watch Hunger Games and feel represented and feel like it's something that interests them, and they're not being they're not the ones who are the target here. And then people like who, the big city elites can look at it and be like, yeah, these people are ridiculous. It's gone way too far, right? Like they're so out of touch. Like that doesn't represent anything that I'm familiar with.
And this is when the rebellion fails, right? Like they've squashed the rebellion, and that's like led to them seeing everyone in the districts a certain way, and then it's like
Yeah.
propaganda and everything else has
Yeah,
been preached
that's the
that
thing,
into
because like
the
we're told that there was a rebellion and that the government squashed the rebellion, and then the Hunger Games were begun as some, I don't know, they don't even really get into details of like how this is supposed to be helpful in any way, but now all of a sudden we're doing the Hunger Games.
No, I think it's they state that it's to remind everyone to not rebel, basically.
To
They
not
say that.
rebel?
Yeah.
Interesting.
They say that like this is the sacrifice that we make to say like remember how bad it can be. And they're trying to keep us in check. It's
Yeah.
like normally this would be something that was done like behind closed doors and there'd be like, you know, all this smoke and mirrors, but instead it's like they're literally telling the citizens like we're going to kill these people as an example, and if you rebel again, it'll be worse than this.
Yeah, but it's some sort of appeasement too. Snow talks about this, like how you have to give them a little bit of hope, like making there be a victor is important versus just executing 24 people.
Exactly, yeah.
Even though it serves a similar purpose. There is something sort of insidious about that. I like that. But my point was, I feel like all of that story is shrouded in propaganda. So I assume with some of this prequel stuff, maybe we're getting a little more clarity on what actually happened in this rebellion, because if when I hear that, I'm like, there's no way that's how it actually went down. That's what the story is now.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? By the
Yeah.
victors. They're telling the history.
They're writing their own narrative of how everything's going, and they
Yeah.
want everybody to think they don't let the districts communicate because they want to keep them separate, but also like maybe it's better in another district, and that they keep all of this unknown there so that they can maintain that level of control.
So I wanted to ask you, what did you think about the overall look of this movie?
I'm gonna jump straight into cinematography because like the look I think overall is pretty slick. It looks pretty well established. I think it's shot well and professionally, but I was shocked and kind of struck by just how handheld. Shaky cam is like a thing that people say now, and it doesn't mean what I think a lot of people thinks it means. This is handheld, and it's meant to be bring like a kinetic energy to the scene and a sense of urgency, and it's
Yeah.
moving right. Like it's reflecting that in the camera work.
And I think it's overdone. I'll just go ahead. There's
It
too
is
much of
overdone. It is overdone. And then in addition to that, there is so much use of close up in this. And I think it's because if you go close up and you're shallow, the sets and the backgrounds can kind of fall out of focus, and
Yeah.
it's not as
Now,
important.
I didn't realize that apparently you said that they had like kind of a lower budget. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I was a little curious why we were. It seemed like they were trying not to show their backgrounds,
There was a,
which is
I think
which
there
is
was a
a
little
shame
bit of that
because
going on.
you know, a movie like Children of Men, where the backgrounds tell so much of the world building, and it tells so many other interesting stories going on. It's not really fair to compare this movie to Children of Men, very different kind of movie. But my point was just like we're flying by all these moments where I'm getting to see a little bit of the world, and I want contextual world building. I want the setting to tell me something about the story.
I love that you're
Yeah,
saying this and you picked up on this too, because that's what I felt. Anytime they were showing things in the scene, I still didn't feel like it was well realized because we didn't get enough wides and enough
yep,
establishing things. And even the medium shot, that it's so much of like how intense a lot of these there were extreme close-ups, and they're handheld, and they're doing
yeah,
it in conversation with people, and it's bringing a level of dramatics to each scene. But if you overdo the close, like it's there as an exclamation point, and if you overdo it, then it just feels like it's the same, and it doesn't
yeah.
provide that. There was so much close-up in this, and again, I think maybe
And
that had
honestly, it doesn't
something to do
serve
with.
your costuming very well either. If you got great costuming and you're spending all your time like an inch from someone's face, like you're not getting to see
Yeah,
the whole ensemble very
and
much.
ultimately,
Obviously, you want some of that. I'm not trying to say it's always bad. Of course, you want that sometimes, but it was just a little too much for my taste.
this is fairly subjective, and in looking, this was intentional. Like Gary Ross said, the decision to go with the handheld look had a lot to do with the urgency of what was going on and to reflect Katniss's point of view, because the book is from first person, so
Sure.
to kind of give a POV for a lot of this stuff. He also mentioned that he wanted to avoid a polished static camera look at all costs, since that would reduce the violence to mere entertainment and be completely contrary to the movie's intention. So he wants it to seem like so dire. Everything feels dire, and it feels like every moment is important. And it does give that, but I just felt like it was a lot. And I think this is a little subjective. Some people, I think when I first saw this movie, I didn't notice it. And
Yeah,
maybe it was a trend at the time,
I think it was.
more in vogue at the time.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And speaking of trends, I also think there's a certain sort of blue sheen to this movie that feels very much of the like late aughts, right? Like
yeah,
that, and especially for YA, I don't know if it was part of an overall trend or if it sort of, I don't know where it came in with Twilight. I mean, it came out around the same time, right? And this one was this
This
a
is
little
on the heels
after?
of Twilight. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
like nearing the end of
Now
Twilight.
it's not as blue as Twilight, but there's still a bit of that like everything's so cool and like it's clearly been color corrected in that cool direction, that like cooler tones direction.
It's funny that you say that though, because I felt like when you shoot in log, you get like a really undersaturated grayish look.
Yeah.
And I felt like this was in some cases, and this wasn't, I think most of what we're seeing is like when we were in the districts, we were seeing undersaturated, very muted colors and that kind of stuff that you were talking about, definitely blue leaning, but it felt like it was like
No,
less
you're
color
right.
corrected
I
in
think
ways.
my eye interprets less color sometimes as cooler color
Yeah.
because it's that bluish gray.
Yeah.
But maybe you're right. Maybe it was more desaturation. But certain colors did pop. It was just like the greens all were like an emerald green. They all had like a blue tinge to them. There
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of warmth in anything, and I think that was by design. They wanted to make it feel like a cold world.
I think that
Um,
once they get into the games, it's different though, right? Did you feel that as much in the
well, like
games as
no,
well?
well, because I was gonna say even the blood looked like super dark, almost black,
Yeah.
because of the way the color was either desaturated or pulled towards that cooler tone. Like nothing was very warm.
And that I wonder if they did intentionally for like ratings reasons, because I know they really wanted to stick to that PG-13 with this
Yeah.
being violent and gory in some what gore was in the
Is
book.
is lighter red gonna like get you
I don't know.
a different rating? Is that how it
Possibly.
works?
I don't know, possibly. I think of like how red Tarantino's blood is and
Yeah,
like
that's
how,
true.
you know,
Yeah, but
how
his is like over the top
there's
red
so
on
much
purpose.
of it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
As far as the look, I think I realized that they were going for a certain thing in the districts, which did work for me. And then they transitioned it to a different sort of look during the games, which makes sense to me. Like tell
Yeah.
each place, make it distinct in its own way. But yeah, it does remind me of those like early 2010s
Yeah.
time period for
It
sure.
felt very of a time in its look and feel.
So Gary Ross is an American filmmaker. He's best known for writing and directing the fantasy comedy drama film Pleasantville in 1998, the sports
Oh.
drama film Seabiscuit in 2003, and then The Hunger Games in 2012.
I have not seen Seabiscuit, but I believe I saw Pleasantville. Was that the one where everything was black and white and then it transitions to color?
Yes. And then he also worked on Ocean's 8, which was the female-led cast
Oh
kind of
yeah, okay.
heist
I haven't
version.
seen
I
that
think that
either,
was
but
2018. He's been nominated for 4 Academy Awards, and he's had an interesting life. I was reading he worked as a fisherman. He worked on Ted Kennedy's 1980 presidential campaign, consulted
oh
on
wow.
both Michael Dukakis' 1988 presidential campaign and Bill Clinton's presidential campaigns. He then wrote a novel, all before being hired to write screenplays for Paramount Pictures.
Okay, cool.
So Big was his first produced screenplay with Tom Hanks. It led to an Academy Award nomination and a Writers Guild of America award. He then wrote and directed Pleasantville, and in 2003 he directed and produced Seabiscuit based on a novel, so it's something we could cover at some point. Seabiscuit, an American Legend.
Interesting. Is that a not? I thought that was a true story for some reason, but
I think it is. So it'd be
novelized, true
novelization of it,
story
I
account
guess. I
kind of
don't.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
That film earned 70 award nominations. So yeah, that was around 2003, and then a few years would go by, and then he hears about this possible adaptation of Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games trilogy,
Hmm.
and he saw his kids were reading it, decided to read it himself, read it in one sitting, which we noted last week that it is
Yeah,
very much a book that you can do that with.
totally.
And he was like, I gotta try to adapt this. So he got in touch with his agent. They got in touch with the producer who had the rights, and he just kind of lobbied for the to direct it.
It seems like a slam dunk, man. This when you read this book, you're like, this would make a great movie. I don't know. That's how I felt reading it. Is like, of course, like it's so you got the whole angle of the TV show that's being made. So there's like a clear way to do this. Like there are difficulties around this dystopian world. Don't get me wrong. But there's just so much there that you're like, yeah, this is made for film.
And a lot of commentaries being made, I think, that are relevant for that time period. And it's a bestseller, right? Like it's already
Yeah,
a
of
bestseller.
course,
It's gonna
yeah.
have that built-in audience. And then I think he delivered a film that, I think we've already addressed some of the things that didn't necessarily hold up, but he delivered a film that I can see people going back to for decades and for a long time, continuing to talk about. And it's set up well enough a possible trilogy, which I do think improves into the next movie. And then beyond that, I can't say. And I will also say that he doesn't come back. He doesn't direct any more of these films.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. But
Yeah.
now is he back for the new one?
No. So there's
Okay.
another filmmaker named Francis Lawrence who comes in and directs Catching Fire, Mockingjay Parts 1 and 2, and he's actually 10 years, about 10 years on, now come back and directed the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
Wow, that's interesting. So you have a director change, and then that new director stays on for the rest of the franchise.
Yeah.
That is kind of a fascinating move to make. And yeah, just for the record, like the proof is already there. Like this movie is a huge success. It did great. It is a cultural touchstone now for people. Like everybody knows Hunger Games, and a large part of that goes to the success of this movie. So yeah, I might be being a little bit critical at times, but obviously, what an achievement.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I found myself enjoying this. I watched it with my fiance, and we had a good time with it. And she was getting emotional. I was getting emotional at times, but it really hit for her. And she was like, "Man, this movie, it's still got some of that emotional punch to it."
Yeah.
There's a couple things I'm going to touch back in on with my fiance Caitlin because Taylor Swift also wrote two songs for this film, and
Oh, really?
they were involved in the re-recording of her work once she got the rights back to her work, or I guess she didn't get the rights back. She re-recorded them so her fans would listen to the new ones. So she would
Cool.
kill me if I didn't mention them. I guess I'll just mention it here. The two songs are called Safe and Sound, which also features the Civil Wars. I think I read that it's one of only three songs that actually appear in the movie. Maybe that's during the credits or something like that.
Yeah.
Supposedly Taylor Swift and the Civil Wars wrote the song within like 2 hours, and it was very successful. She also wrote Eyes Open. So there were two songs on the soundtrack, which was a pretty, I think I saw like Coldplay had a song in there. Like these
Hmm.
soundtracks were pretty popular as far as artists they were
Yeah.
able to get to make music for these
They
movies.
continue to be too. I think it was the second movie, maybe. I'm not really sure, but I'm not a big fan of a lot of those artists. I don't have anything against them. They're just not people that I follow closely. But there's a group called Churches that I do really like, and they had a big song. I think they came out for the second movie. I want to say that it was on the soundtrack, and I actually ended up really liking. So, yeah, these were big musical soundtracks, which is something that I feel like you don't see a lot anymore
I
these
mean,
days, right?
yeah, these days it's few and far between, but we did talk about in Twilight. Paramore wrote a song for
Yeah.
Twilight. So this is like a
So maybe
continuing
it's that
trend.
YA thing, like young kids like music, I guess. So you get a
I
lot
mean,
of
and
popular
again, it
artists.
appeals to a bunch of different demographics, right? Like
That's
there's
true.
the young adults into young adult, like 20s and things like that.
Hmm.
So they kind of know, like they had their finger on the pulse of I think music and the films at the time and who was going to see them. I would say that I wasn't the biggest Taylor Swift fan, but as time has gone on and she's re-recorded her material, I've grown a lot of respect for her as an artist. So I'll
Yeah,
just say that there because
my
I
wife
know
is a huge fan.
there's some passionate fans out there. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife is a huge fan, and I'm definitely not going to say anything negative about her. I'm not that foolish. No, and I think she's obviously super talented. It's just not really my thing. Like I don't know,
Sure.
I've just never really felt like I want to come back to it that much. But every time it's on, I'm like, yeah, this is good music. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where I'm at with old Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Swifties, don't kill me, don't kill me.
Uh,
Seriously, nothing against her, but
So I wanted to circle back to something we were talking about before, which is just like the financial pressure of the time. On the DVD extras, Gary Ross explained we were under tremendous financial pressure for this movie. It's under $80 million and it's a big movie. Other blockbusters cost twice and three times as much. And I think notable, this movie cost 80 million. I think it made like 650 to 700
wow.
million. And then the budgets shot up for
Yeah,
the follow-up movies and it just continued to get bigger. So
interesting.
interesting to see a director come in, hit well enough with this first film to set it all up, him leave, and then the budgets get a lot bigger, things get easier, stars get paid. I think I read that Jennifer Lawrence made $500,000 as an actor for this movie, and then the next movie she makes like 10 million. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
like the
she became
scale.
she became a huge star after this.
Yeah. She was
Yeah.
already a rising star, but this, yeah,
Was she?
superstardom.
I didn't know. I guess
Yeah.
I don't know what she was in before
She
this.
was in an X-Men movie before this. She was in
Oh,
Winter's Bone. She was in a couple of
was
things.
she in that first class
Yep.
X-Men movie? That was before this.
She
Okay.
was Mystique. Yeah. I think it was
Yeah,
2010,
she
so
was pretty
a
big
little
in that. You're
2011.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I thought for some reason this was like the start of her career for some reason.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, this definitely like put her on the map in a major way. What's interesting about Jennifer Lawrence too is I was reading She kind of came from a small town in Kentucky, and I think Josh Hutcherson did as well.
Yeah.
And both are not, they kind of didn't want the fame in ways, especially Jennifer Lawrence. She was reluctant. She almost turned it down
Yeah.
because she didn't want it to affect what she'd already been building as like an indie-ish career. And
I'm
these
a big
kind of,
fan of her personally, honestly. Like she's got an awesome personality. Like she's so different than Katniss. Katniss is like so serious, so like her whole thing is she's not super likable. She doesn't like smile for the cameras or whatever. But you ever watch Jennifer Lawrence in interviews? Like she's like a chaotic mess, but she's hilarious. I don't
very
know. She's super
relatable.
fun,
Yeah,
super relatable, down to earth, and like that's not how at all how Katniss is. So it is interesting that she is able to pull this role off because it's quite different than who she really is.
Goes to show like how good of an actor she is, and then it
Yeah,
continues on. She's now Academy Award winning Jennifer
yeah,
Lawrence. Like she's had a great career, and it was, you know, she kind of went away from the spotlight for a while, and now has
yeah.
come back some. So
Well,
it's cool to see her back.
there was a lot of sexism and unfortunate harassment and shit that I remember reading about, and you know that too often affects women, you know, in the performing arts, and especially if they get famous at a certain age and then they start to age, then all of a sudden like people turn on them, and it's just awful. But that's a whole nother topic we could have a whole podcast about probably.
Yeah, I mean we've addressed it before many times, and it's like it's not balanced, right? It's very
No, of
clearly
course not.
skewing in one direction
Yeah.
of people who are being targeted for this kind of stuff.
I want to think it's getting better, but maybe that's some optimism in me that isn't deserved. I don't know.
Yeah. I want to talk about a couple more people while we're here. Lenny Kravitz is Cinna.
Yeah.
Really cool to see Lenny Kravitz in that role. And Cinna is such a like a likable character right away. Very aware of the situation and like knows what Katniss needs in the scenario. So
Yeah. Upon further scrutiny, it is a little strange how quickly Katniss hits it off with Cinna.
yeah.
It doesn't take much at all for Cinna to all of a sudden become a trusted confidant.
Mm.
Now you could
Like you're
read it
saying
in
for her to trust him.
yes, for Katniss to be like, oh, this Cinna guy, he's totally trustworthy. He's got my best interests in at heart. You know, like he proves himself. Don't get me wrong, but she trusts him from the jump. Like, they immediately have this connection, and it's because he comes in and like says, "I'm sorry this happened to you," and it was like no one had said that yet, which is cool, but like also that could be a play. You know what I mean? Like she's not very distrustful of him, which I found a little surprising, but you kind of have to move things along. You could assume that there's some other time built in there where they get to know each other. We're just not seeing. So I'm fine with it ultimately
Yeah.
in a movie like this.
I think, like I said, he's super aware of the whole scenario and like knows what to say. And yes, there very well could have been a situation where he, you know, had nefarious interests or whatever and wanted to trick her. But she does buy into it, and that kind of rewards her eventually because that's like one of her closest connections, someone she can be emotional with and like be honest with, and it's in a time
Yeah.
when she couldn't with anybody else. So yeah,
Yeah,
just a cool character.
it makes sense, and I like his role in the movie. It's good for her to have a character like that she can really trust. I just thought it happened a little quickly,
Sure.
where she was all of a sudden like, you're my best friend, you're my father figure, and I love you.
Yeah. A lot of different people pop up that have had a continuing career. Jack Quaid plays Marvel, one of
Yeah.
the tributes, and he's obviously like Dennis Quaid's son, but he's in The Boys. He's like the main character in The Boys.
I was like,
and
the guy from The Boys kills Rue. I did not remember
yeah,
that.
yeah, he does.
He
Pretty
does.
small role, but funny to see him like all smug in the background and cool. And I'm like,
Yeah.
his character in The Boys is like very different than that. We have Josh Hutcherson, who we haven't talked a ton about, but what did you think of him in the role of Peeta?
I think he's good. Honestly, he plays this role well. He's got that affable, kind of down to earth vibe to him, and I think that comes across well on screen. Yeah, I like him okay, and I tend to feel bad for Peeta in this story, just like we did in the book, and I feel bad for him here, where like he's the one who truly believes all of this. I don't know how clear that is in the movie, by the way. I think you could walk away from this movie thinking that Katniss genuinely felt love for him, and in the book, sure, she might have started to develop some feelings, but it's very clear that she also is like playing it up big time, and she assumes he is too. And I just don't know that was as clear in this movie as it was in the book.
I felt a few times where I was like, what would people have thought if they didn't read the book first? Like, what did people think in these scenes? Like, and I know like this is kind of a bad example because it's like extrapolated on later, but the first time we see a flash of her look at PETA and like the bread is thrown to her, you have no context for what that is.
Yeah.
And again, they extrapolate so it makes sense later and it connects back. But there were a few times like that where I kept thinking like this is more for the people who've read the book to get that beat than it is to like really explain anything for the film
Yeah.
going audience.
Yeah. Let's get into the chronology because I have a couple of scenes and little questions about stuff like that where again I have little quibbles, even though I overall enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, yeah. So here we go. Panem is a nation divided into 12 districts ruled from the capital. As punishment for a failed revolt, each district must annually choose 2 tributes, 1 boy and 1 girl, to fight to the death in the Hunger Games. The event is televised across the capital and all districts until only one victor remains. After her younger sister Primrose is selected, Katniss Everdeen of District 12 volunteers to take her place in the 74th Hunger Games. She and fellow tribute Peeta Mellark are escorted to the capital by their chaperone Effie Trinket and mentor Haymitch Abernathy, the game's only living winner from District 12. Haymitch stresses the importance of winning over sponsors as they can provide potentially life-saving gifts during the games. During a televised interview with Caesar Flickerman, Peeta confesses his feelings for Katniss, which she initially sees as an attempt to attract sponsors.
Yeah, so this movie starts strong, I think. It's got that classic text overlay where we're going to give you a little bit of world building with white text on a black background. I was a little surprised to see it. I did not remember that, but I don't know. This kind of gives a throwback vibe for me. I'm okay with a little bit of front loading. Like, tell us something we need to know so that we can situate ourselves. I feel like filmmakers don't like to do that anymore.
I think
But
that it can be a little rough to just exposition somebody right at the beginning. And again,
yeah,
this isn't like verbally told to you, but you read it. But I'm the kind of audience that's willing to invest early, but I do think it's like it can be a little jarring.
I give a filmmaker a little bit of leeway right at the start of a movie, right? Like it's almost like before we get into it, before we're even
Right.
showing you the first scene, let me just tell you something you need to know. You know, it's the text scroll at the start of Star Wars. Like I'm okay with a little bit of this, and maybe it's because I'm a little older and I watched like older movies that I'm nostalgic for it, but I'm okay with it. I think it's a shame that people are moving away from that. Yeah, sure, you don't want to use it as a crutch, but I think a little bit's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I
Um,
agree with you in general. I don't have anything necessarily against it. I just think that like it can be seen as like why are you immediately dropping me into something that, instead of showing me something in a film? Like that's what film is,
yeah.
right? Um,
Sure, it's exposition, absolutely, right from the jump. We're just going to tell you something. We're not going to show it to you at all. Maybe you'll get it later. I also want to talk about a moment that is an interesting one for me. So I have this course on cliches that I'm going to be teaching coming up next year. It's just these like little one-offs, and I'll talk about them on my social media and stuff. They're available online, and people can sign up. But one of them is about cliches, and it's about literally like improving your prose by eliminating cliches in your prose. And one of the things I talk about in that presentation is about how you can develop your own cliches and put them to use in your fiction to great effect. One of my examples is "May the odds be ever in your favor," and I was sort of reminded of this watching this movie because they say it a bunch of times to where it's clearly an in-world cliche, but it was invented by by Suzanne Collins in this property. That's not something I believe anybody would say like said in real life. But now, if you say that, you're referencing this because it's such a well-known phrase. There's a few like "Winter is coming" from Game of Thrones. You could
Sure.
say is kind of a cliche because they say it so often. There's just certain things that where it's kind of fun that you can develop them, and then the weird part of our language is how they will then become real world cliches that people won't want to say because it's like, oh, that's a cliche, and it's like, no, you're actually referencing a specific property when you say that.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah.
And the whole point is that Shakespeare did this a ton. Like so many of modern cliches come from Shakespeare because he did this. He just invented them, put them in his fiction, and they became so iconic that people started saying them all the time.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like everybody loves referencing, even back to Shakespeare apparently. Like
Yeah.
people reference Shakespeare all the time. And it's just about like being a part of a club or being a part of a group of people who've had like a shared experience.
Talking about this opening, one of the big changes, and curious how you felt about it. Haymitch isn't present during the reaping in this version. In the book, he's there and he takes this dive. He's like drunk. He takes a dive, and like all of the sort of tension of the moment dissipates when all of the people of District 12 are doing the like three fingers in the air, sort of rebellious, refusing to applause moment. And Haymitch does this, and at first it seems like he's just a drunk buffoon, but then later I kind of interpreted it as that was a deliberate act on his part to try and like divide focus away from the district, because it's his district, right? Like he's from District 12, and he clearly has an affection for them and doesn't want them to be punished. That's all removed here. It does save Woody Harrelson as Haymitch for his own separate scene later, being introduced, and like he gets his own moment. But what are your thoughts on the change there and how that affected the opening?
I think that I missed it. I missed the moment because it is like that cunning thing that we want to establish with Haymitch early on. But I get why they didn't. I think his introduction in the movie does a bit of that, the same stuff. I think like right away he's being introduced. He seems...
Well, it does the drunk. It does it's the train sequence, right? Like he comes out drunk and he doesn't want to help them, at first, and he seems uninterested in being a mentor, convinced that they're just gonna die. He's like, accept the probability of your death is like his advice to them, and I think that's a great scene, and I think the tendency was that they wanted to save it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I kind of think it's a shame because of what it does for Haymitch as a character. And as much as I like him in the movie, it would have been cool to have him do that. And then later when you introduce him, you have a little bit of that background now. You've seen him do something. Yeah. But maybe you could say it distracts from Effie, who's getting her moment too. Because she's up there like commanding presence too, so there's pros and cons.
I think Haymitch gets more to do in the second one as well, in the second book and the second movie. Yeah, I missed the scene, but I guess I'm fine with it.
Another criticism, just a little quibble I'll have, is that Katniss's home life with her mother was kind of bizarre to me. Later, we get this sequence. I know this happens later. We get this like flashback about her father going down the mine shaft, and there's like an explosion. But it's during this like hallucination sequence, if I remember correctly, and that's supposed to provide a little bit of context. But her mom is so cold, and this is played by Paula Malcolmson, who like I've seen her in other stuff to where like I know she has the range to do all sorts of different things, but instead she just doesn't really do hardly anything. She has a very flat affect. Katniss basically tells her what to do, and it does establish Katniss is like she's the real matriarch of this family in a way. Yeah. But the whole situation at home with her mother, I don't know if it was fully realized, I guess is what I'm getting at. Like I never really felt like I had a good handle on it, at least in the context of the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting because I felt like it did what the book set out to do, which is say exactly what you're saying, is like she's kind of not there. She's not there for Katniss, and she's been almost comatose for all that period of time because she's been dealing with her grief. And I think Katniss kind of resents her for that, and I think all that came across in the scene.
I think I'm bringing some of that from the book, though. I'm just saying, like, I don't know how much of that is achieved on camera, as much as it's just kind of like a weird relationship with her mom. She's like, people are like, what's going on with her mom? Because they don't even show the mine shaft thing, what happened to her dad, till way later.
But I mean, that her dad's not there. We don't see her dad anywhere, so you can kind of, I guess, draw context of like something happened.
So what did you think of the flaming girl on fire sequence, and how that was brought to the screen?
I thought it was cool. I think that it looked visually better than I would have imagined. I think they pulled it off for the movie. I think that the costuming in general was pretty impressive, and the hairstyles and the way that the makeup work, all of it, I was pretty struck with, especially
they dyed
when
a Borzoi pink. I don't know if you saw this.
What's that?
They dyed a Borzoi pink. It's like those long, shaggy greyhound looking dogs.
Yeah.
Somebody in the Capitol was walking one, and all of its hair was pink.
Yeah, I mean, impressive when you start thinking about the budget and like how much went into a lot of this. And they had to sell it, and I think they did pretty well. Like I said, there are a few like CG moments of like showing the Capitol wide, but like it just didn't feel lived in, and that's how I felt about a lot of the movie, which I get they were up against the wall. They needed to do what they could, and they establish it well enough to where like you get it. And especially if you've read the book, you can kind of paint the rest of it in your mind.
The not feeling lived in thing, I think you're hitting the nail on the head for me. And this is the same problem I have with some Star Wars films, where we see these wide shots of like massive futuristic looking cities, but like often it doesn't feel like a real space. It just doesn't feel like a space where people actually live, and that's what the capital's supposed to be in some fashion. We have these huge, like where the chariots are coming in, these huge crowds, and this huge like arena looking space. I don't even know what the space is. It's like shadowy, and again, it's just like it feels a little fakey to me.
And the
And I
CG
never
work
quite
of
buy it.
and the CG work of like the late to early 2000s to 2010s, uh, it just doesn't. It's at that threshold where like it's almost there, but it
Yeah,
just doesn't hold up. And I was noticing that a lot. And maybe that could have been done away with if with more time and more money poured into it. But a lot of the CG work in this is a little uncanny valley to where it doesn't fit. The crowds like they look real, and then the background doesn't. So you can just see the difference in something that's real, something that's CG. And it just like there's that line that it's like you can buy it and you're like, okay, it's a movie. But I think the CG like 10 years on is like getting pretty close to where you can't tell the difference in some cases.
yeah. I mean, but also the artistry behind it has to be on point, right? The tool exists, but the people behind it have to put the work in and know what to do with the
Right.
tool.
And I think that's kind of what I
But
meant with
I'm not
like,
an expert on CGI or anything, so I don't want to get too far down this
yeah,
road. It's just kind of like armchair analysis of difficult special effects sequences.
totally. And that's, I think my point with like just amount of time and money they can pour into it, I think could have helped it. And it just
Yeah.
reminds me of like, do the best you can with what you're given. And it reminds me of some other stuff that we've seen in that genre in that time period.
So I think you ended that plot synopsis with Peeta professing his love, right? And that's on camera with Cesar Flickerman. And I was just thinking about how like it's such a smart move to have it play this way. Um, and the fact that it's genuinely true for Peeta, yet the idea of him being in love with the other, honestly, more talented and more deadly tribute from his own district is a smart angle for the TV show. On top of it, it creates such interesting drama because you can see her viewing it as a very calculated play, but on his part, it's like, yeah, it looks like a very calculated play, but it's also true. And it's very difficult for him to convince her that he's not just making it up for the strategy of it all, because honestly, it would be a great strategy. Like if he didn't have any feelings for her, he should play them up and pretend like he does, because it would be a smart thing to do.
Yeah. And this just gets ramped up to like 11 once the games start too, right? Like you're
Yeah.
looking at them and you're thinking, and this is all credit to Suzanne Collins too, right? Like
Yeah.
she came up
Oh,
with
absolutely.
this premise and the way that these things are playing out.
Well, and ultimately, and I was
Peter,
touching on
yeah.
this earlier, I think it works a little better in the book because I think it's clearer that Katniss has a lot of like doubt about whether or not any of this is real, and then she's more playing it up for the camera because we're in her head and we know how she actually is thinking in these moments. Whereas on screen, I really think viewers could be forgiven for thinking that like a lot of this is genuine from both sides, and on almost equal amounts. Whereas I think they're trying to imply what's going on in the book, which is the much more of like Katniss doesn't know about this, and maybe she has a little bit of genuine feelings, but it's a lot more being played up for the camera.
Well, and this kind of gets to what I was talking about with like when you're in the games too, it's they're going through these things together, and like through they're forging a relationship through that pressure. And then they kind of have feelings for each other that might not even be romantic in ways, and that gets confusing at that point. And so Katniss may even feel like she is in love with him in some ways, and or at least like the bond that they share is something mere like getting close to loving him in a sense. I don't know. And then same for him is like it's reaffirming all of those feelings that he's having. So it's like because going into the second one, I think, and even at the end of this one, I think that there's a lot going on that lets you see that like both they're not on the same page, and like will they ever be? Is this a will they won't they scenario, which I think the genre is known for, but
Yeah.
I think it's probably you're going to see some flip-flopping too. Like maybe sometimes somebody loves someone and then it's too late and this person's moved on and that kind of thing.
The love for Gale is still there. I guess it's kind of, I feel like I'm trying to make kind of a subtle point, but like it just seems to me like moviegoers are set up to be more frustrated with Katniss for the way she doesn't honor the feelings that we all saw during the Hunger Games, the show, whatever, with PETA, by then being on the fence about it afterwards.
Yeah,
right, and being like, oh, you really played that up for the camera. Like that element is underserved a little bit to me in the movie, to where when she all of a sudden is behaving that way, I think the audience is largely just frustrated with her and like, like, what are you doing? Whereas in the book, I felt like Suzanne Collins did a really good job of consistently showing her having doubts about whether or not PETA was being truthful in the way he was behaving, and then also like saying, I'm going to really play this up specifically for this strategic reason.
I think audiences are also frustrated with Katniss in the book at the end, because it's whether or not you as the reader have bought into PETA as.
But that's mostly because I feel bad for PETA.
Yeah.
Like,
That's what
I
I was going to say, is if
understand
you
her
bought
position.
into PETA as a character and you like you want that relationship to continue or to start.
Well, and another element that plays into it is I don't know that the benefit of the audience is as clear in the movie. I think there are moviegoers who could be forgiven for thinking that when she gets sent medication and it says, apply liberally, stay alive, H, from Haymitch, right? And it comes down in that little parachute, that's just something Haymitch sent to her. Like, we've talked about sponsors, but I don't know that the connection has been made clear that this was an expensive thing that a person decided to pay for and got sent to Haymitch, and then the only reason he's the one who's sending it to her is because he has the control of when to send certain paid for gifts.
Right.
But it's not like it's something he just decided to give her because he saw she needed it, and he could just do that if he wanted to. And I think if you're not paying really close attention, you might not get that. And so the whole element of like playing to sponsors so that you could get gifts, if you don't quite understand that that's how these gifts are arriving, that this isn't just something Haymitch is choosing to do. Because the other thing later with the whole, like, you call that a kiss, like that just almost seems like Haymitch is being manipulative for no real reason. And maybe he's trying to make it more of appealing overall to like the greater society, and like he's trying to protect them in that sense of like make them more likable. But there's not that direct, like, no, he's trying to get them sponsors so that they can get more little gifts.
It would have brought it full circle too if they didn't cut District, I think 11, giving Katniss a gift after the Rue deathing. It would have come all first. It would have really made sense.
I missed that. I did miss that moment.
So at the start of the games, Katniss grabs supplies scattered around the cornucopia before fleeing into the surrounding forests, narrowly escaping death. She tries to distance herself from other tributes, but Seneca Crane, the head game maker, triggers a forest fire to drive her towards them. She runs into the careers, composed of District 1's tributes Marvel and Glimmer, and District 2's tributes Cato and Clove, and flees up a tree. PETA, who has seemingly allied with them, suggests they wait her out. The following morning, Rue, District 11's young female tribute, signals Katniss towards a nest of tracker jackers. Katniss cuts the nest to fall onto the career sleeping below. Glimmer dies, but the others manage to escape. Katniss retrieves Glimmer's bow, but falls ill from being stung several times. PETA returns and urges her to flee before fleeing himself. Rue helps Katniss recover, and the two become friends and allies. Katniss destroys a stockpile of the career's supplies by detonating the mines guarding it, while Rue provides a distraction. Later, Katniss finds and rescues Rue from a trap set by the careers. Marvel appears and fatally impales Rue with his spear just as Katniss shoots him dead. She comforts Rue by singing, and after she dies, adorns her body with flowers, a gesture that incites a riot in District 11. Panem President Coriolanus Snow warns Crane he is displeased about the unrest, stating the game's purpose is to instill hope to prevent future uprisings.
Yeah, what an anus. Old Coriolanus.
Coriolanus.
Yeah, so we've touched on a lot of this, so we don't have to rehash it, but one thing that stands out for me in there is the death by wasps. Like, it's in the book, but holy shit, is that horrific. I can think a few ways that would be worse than going out by being stung to death by wasps. That looked fucking horrific.
That would be
Um,
terrible because
yeah,
you're also like you think about it's just all swelling, and then I think you would probably it would find it
choke.
difficult to breathe and
Yep.
choke, and
I
yeah,
think that's
it's
probably how you die. Maybe you
terrible.
go into some sort of anaphylactic shock, and
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes your heart stop or whatever. But to me, it seems like your windpipe closes, and you're just in excruciating pain.
yeah.
Glimmer was definitely pretty horrible, but damn, that's a bad way to go. Um, Pretty horrific. And that's the thing. At times, there's some pretty horrifying violence. The bloodbath at the cornucopia. I thought this was a sequence you had to nail to make this movie work, and they do nail it. I think the way this plays out makes a lot of sense. The idea
I
that the
love the silence
careers,
as they start and run after as the timer hits zero and they all start running. The silence there,
yeah,
I think, really speaks volumes to like what's happening, how horrific it is, and how like the like trauma that's being instilled in all these people right away, and the
yeah,
danger of it.
and it makes sense to me that the careers who've been training for this moment, right, and they've been going through all this work, like this is their moment, and like they're of course going to go for the cornucopia. And it's something Hamish said, and it might be in the book too, but where he says like that's not your game. Like I think he's aware that like everybody's got a different strategy for winning this thing, and it makes sense that the careers are like somebody's going to get all these supplies. We're the most equipped for this,
Yeah,
so we're going to go for it. And like I've been training, like they've probably been practicing these kind of scenarios, you know what I mean, so they kind of know how it's going to play out to some extent.
these like
So
brawls like this. Yeah,
yeah. So of course, Hamish's advice to Katniss to not go there is absolutely the right advice. Like,
yeah,
because if you're screwed, if like you're just some random person who's never been in a moment like this, never had any practice, and you're gonna try and run in there, like they're ready for you.
yeah,
And we see that play out where I think like 12 of the participants die immediately.
yeah. Like right away, maybe even 13. And
Yeah,
this start. There's a couple things that I think about with the careers. So they train specifically to get all the supplies and be ready with all of them.
yeah,
And they're well fed, they're well trained, all this other stuff. And it makes me think about like when I guess I didn't put it into context of when Katniss destroys the supplies later, how detrimental that is to those specific people because they're not used to the hardships of like not having the food, not having the
yeah.
supplies. They're so reliant on it in a way that like Katniss just isn't because we're so far in her perspective. I guess I was kind of far from reach that. This made me make those connections, and then also Caitlin, my fiance, mentioned, is this like is Hunger Games partly to be credited for the rise of battle royale video games?
I think so, honestly. But I mean, and the battle royale film, and obviously that we touched on the
Yes.
controversy last
Yeah.
week. So if you want to hear us talk about battle royale, check out we went into kind of a deep thing about that last week, so we can't rehash it here. But yeah, I honestly think both of those were foundational for battle royale as a game type exploding in popularity.
And it's crazy to think because of like how Fortnite makes just billions of dollars off of selling
You know,
skins and all this other stuff.
you know what's
And
kind of crazy? I don't think there's like a Hunger Games video game.
there should have been, right? If they had just been ahead of the curve, they could have made a
Yeah.
Hunger Games battle royale and
I wonder if
been
it's something
the
to do with
Fortnite.
Suzanne Collins not wanting that, because it does feel a little bit gross.
True. Yeah.
I would say and
That's something
so,
else we addressed last week, which is the
yeah,
idea of like the spectacle being the thing that draw audiences in, and kind of sometimes I feel like people have blinders on for some of the commentary being made of like
yeah,
it's kind of about taking down this oppressive regime, not the
yeah.
the
We're
spectacle
not
of the
supposed
games.
to think this is super fun and great. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be horrific. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the careers because I find them really interesting, and the way Suzanne Collins handles them interesting. And they are the one piece of this puzzle that really doesn't get much sympathy and doesn't get much like rounded out characterization. They're villainous throughout. They are like blatantly villainous. They seem bloodthirsty and demented and sociopathic. Now, maybe you could say that like that is somehow like manifested and like manufactured in this process, and that those are the people who end up getting it. Maybe there's a volunteer process for that. I don't know. But my assumption is they're still being chosen by lottery.
I think I think they say they volunteer they train to 18 and then every year somebody volunteers when they're like the peak physical shape and they're ready to go kind of thing. And
Yeah.
that's in the book.
But it's just interesting to me because there's still a district that is under some level of oppression, I would think.
Yeah.
Unless these early, like these districts 1 and 2 are like the people who are living in the capital, but I wasn't clear about that. I assumed that the people who are in the capital are not participating in the games. They're
No, they're
only
not.
viewers of it.
I think this is pulling from knowledge from another book, but I believe they do their job is so tightly connected to the capital that they're given preferential treatment without that actually being a thing. Like they still have to
Yeah.
have their tributes, that all that other stuff, but their jobs, whatever, I forget what they develop, whatever they're in charge of. Like
Yeah.
I think the capital like likes them and favors them and that kind of stuff, and maybe illegally gives them better food or treatment in some way.
Do they? I
Um,
wonder if they side with the capital more when the wars started actually breaking out.
yeah,
Because like it just seemed to me like the fact that these are still children who have been, even if they've been sort of manipulated in this situation, there's very little we get that says like this is actually pretty horrific for them too. They're out here dying,
yeah. Well,
and for the same sort of fucked up reasons that everybody else is dying.
one of the greatest moments, I think, and it's not necessarily a change as much as it's just well adapted, is the end when Kato is there and he's like basically been torn apart and he knows he's gonna die, but he has this moment where he can kill PETA, and he says like, I guess I should have known I was always dead, or something like that. I was always
Yeah,
dead. And like I think that when these
that is the
people are
one moment
dying,
where they give him something
yeah, and I think
outside of
when these
his, yeah,
when they're dying, they realize like they're being manipulated, how small this role is
right.
in the grand scheme, and all of that comes like
And I don't.
at the
How
wrong
did you
time.
read that moment? Like, what does he mean by "I was always going to die"? Do you think he is saying that he believes that this was scripted in some way, like that they
No, I think
were chosen to be the victors and that he was chosen to die?
I think one of two things. I think either they underestimated Katniss and she really was just like this much of a threat, and he was always going to die because she was always going to win. Not that it was scripted in that way, just that she had the skills to survive. Or he just means like whether he won or not, it doesn't matter. He was always
Hmm.
like a pawn in their game.
See, I think I took it more as like a almost like a complaining about the like complaining about the refs.
Yeah.
Like that they were helping you. They were sending you medicine. Like you were picked to be the victor by the audience, and
Oh,
sort of
okay.
working the refs a little bit. Like
Sure.
they didn't like me, so that's why I'm losing.
Well, and you could argue too that like Haymitch convincing Seneca Crane to change the rules of the game,
Yeah.
to where like the tributes could go together, could work together, and I think that's after his partner is gone, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. And that opens up another whole thing I wanted to bring up. The main difference between book and film for me, when it comes to the games themselves, is the limited POV of Katniss in the book makes it so everything that's going on outside of it, she's guessing at what's going on. She's guessing why they're making these changes. The gamekeepers we hear about the sponsors, all of this she's interpreting, but we're locked in her perspective. So we only see the end result of these actions. And so it leaves enough room for us to fill in a lot of details, and like my imagination is going wild figuring out like how these things come to be, why they're making certain decisions. In the movie, we are shown all of this. We are shown the conversation between Haymitch and Seneca Crane, where he convinces him to do this, but then we see the follow-up conversation with Crane and Snow, where Snow tells him to be careful, and like all this stuff. We see that all the like sort of politics. We see the inside of the gamekeepers' room where they're all literally manifesting all of this stuff. Whereas they're just like vengeful gods kind of in the book, because she's just trying to like project what they're doing, but like we don't know why they're doing the things they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's just a big difference in perspective in what we can actually see playing out. And it changes a little bit of the feel of the games to me, like on a fundamental level, because we're seeing both sides of it rather than being in the games with Katniss and that being our only perspective.
It's interesting to think of a version of this film where we do stay that close perspective to Katniss. I think it would even feel even less fleshed out of a world, like, just because like when we see that stuff, it's giving us context
Yeah.
that maybe
I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I think it should have been that way.
yeah,
It
but you're
just
just saying
is
it's
a big
changing
difference.
the story. Yeah,
Yeah, it changes the story. I see why they did it, and honestly, I think you probably need to. That's probably the right decision, but it fundamentally changes the way the games feel to me.
yeah, I get that. Yeah, and I agree. I think the stuff with Rue works just as well as it did in the book for me. It's heartbreaking, the stuff the way
Yeah.
that it happens, seeing a little girl, and that girl is like perfectly cast as Rue.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that works. It works well. It's up until the point we already touched on a little bit, but the change to have, instead of an act of rebellion in a sense by 11, District 11 honoring her death. I think they send bread. Is that what's in the book? I'm trying to remember. They send a
Something like that, a
gift of
gift,
some
yeah.
kind. I want to say it's like bread or something as like a thank you. But again, this is Katniss. We're in Katniss's perspective, so she's just interpreting what's happening. And instead, here we see an actual riot break out in District 11, and then it gets sort of quashed. I don't know. I guess it broadens it out in the idea of it being on like a razor's edge of rebellion, and how maybe this is starting something. I don't know. I think I prefer the book's version as like a more of a symbolic rebellion moment than we're just seeing this kind of this
Yeah.
riot that gets quashed. I don't know.
So the District 11 sending a gift to Katniss is a big deal too, because it's not even necessarily rebellion as much as it's seeing the districts coming together in a way that they
Yeah,
normally wouldn't.
good
And
point.
that's like maybe the beginning of a connection that could build into something like that. I didn't mind seeing the riots though in the movie, because I think that for the film going audience to make it clear how close they are to like this powder keg is ready to explode. It worked for me, and I do think like seeing a young girl die like this could definitely be the spark that
Yeah.
starts something like that. And
And to be fair, you could do both, and I
sure.
guess that's where I'm ultimately at. Like, yeah, I think there was a good purpose for having the riot, but you could have had the riot break out after some sort of explanation of this gift getting sent.
Okay, so Haymitch persuades Crane to change the rules, allowing for two victors if they are from the same district, suggesting it would appease the public. Katniss finds Peeta severely injured, and they take shelter in a cave together. Despite Peeta's protests, Katniss leaves to get medicine. She is ambushed and overpowered by Clove, who gloats about Rue's death before preparing to attack. Thresh, District 11's male tribute, overhears this and intervenes, killing Clove. He spares Katniss in memory of Rue. Katniss returns to the cave with the medicine, tending to Peeta's wounds overnight. While out hunting for food, Katniss hears a cannon blast signaling a death. She rushes to Peeta, who has unwittingly collected deadly nightlock berries. They find Foxface's body, District 5's female tribute, poisoned by the berries she had gathered while watching Peeta. As the games draw to a close, Crane unleashes genetically modified beasts that kill Thresh and force Katniss, Peeta, and Cato, the final tributes, to climb onto the cornucopia's roof. Cato grabs Peeta in a headlock, using him as a human shield against Katniss's arrow. Katniss shoots Cato's hand, allowing Peeta to throw him into the beast below. Suddenly, Crane revokes the rule change permitting two victors. Peeta implores Katniss to shoot him, but she convinces him to consume nightlock berries with her. Just as they are about to eat the berries, Crane declares them co-victors. After the games, Haymitch warns Katniss of the enemies she has made through her rebellious acts. Snow orders for Crane to be locked in a room with a bowl of nightlock berries before contemplating his next course of action. I got to talk about my favorite part of the movie. It's hilarious to me. It's also effective and it does work. I just still think it's just always going to be funny to me. And that's when Peeta is painted into the mud and he opens his eyes and reaches out and his head comes out.
Yeah,
It always gets a laugh out of me, and like again, it's just a funny looking moment. I don't know
yeah,
how else to describe it. Just seeing a person covered in like mud and like in that way. But
yeah,
it does work as effective camouflage. Like I wouldn't have seen it.
yeah. I don't know how it looks so good, but I'm assuming there's some sort of feature tech for like being able to quickly apply camouflage that looks
No,
that
it's
fucking
just
compelling.
baking. If you know how to
He's
decorate a
he's iced
cake,
a cupcake before.
yeah. If you know how to do that, you can hide yourself in camouflage. Everybody knows this.
Yeah. It's funny. I agree. I want to talk about some of the differences here. So I think the romance, we've already touched on a lot of like the perspectives of it and what's going on with it, but also there's less heat here, I think. We only see a couple of small kisses. There's not really a lot of like sparks between them. A lot of it is left to be sort of implied. They're snuggling and what have you. But in the book, there was a lot more like makeouts, it seemed like to me, in
Yeah.
that cave.
There's a
And
moment where she has to like
yeah,
take his pants off or something, right? Or she doesn't want to take it, something
I
like
don't
that in
remember,
the book.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is also like, even in the book, I remember thinking like, man, there's nothing like applying a salve to a infected wound on a feverish individual to get me excited. Like it's really weird that this is the romantic moment because like PETA, would be feeling like death. And
Yeah.
then the idea of like treating a wound is about as opposite from sexy as you can get.
I
So
think he's just one of the
um,
horniest individuals to walk the planet. And
yeah, I
so
was gonna
he's like,
say,
even through
the
the
counter to
pain.
that is they are what, like 16, 17-year-olds.
Sure.
So like, maybe it just overrides.
He's like,
it.
I don't care. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, in the book, I think they say something about how like he ended up losing the leg, right? And they had to go with like a robotic leg.
Oh
or
yeah,
something
you're
like
right.
that.
Yeah, he has a robotic leg in the book.
They don't do that, interestingly.
Yeah, that is a big difference.
Because it was like that's
So,
showing
yeah.
like how dire his injuries were in the book.
Right.
Is like that he ended up losing his leg. So like for him to be, still romantically involved with Katniss while he's like got a leg that
limb.
you know.
Yeah, he's like, nah, let's make out.
Right. That's how strong his feelings are, I guess.
Yeah, and then we get the dogs being released. I felt like that moment. First off, it's darker in the book because in the book they're like mutants that are blended in some way we don't understand with those who have fallen so far in the games.
Yeah, they have their eyes. I think they have like human eyes,
Yes.
and they have their numbers.
It's like an
the numbers
annihilation
that
moment or something. It's like fucking, or like what's that? For Full Metal Alchemist or something. I don't want to
Exactly,
spoil
yeah.
that, but like
Spoilers
these
for
are
that,
some
yeah.
sort of weird fucking like hybrid mutants.
Chimeras. Yeah.
Chimeras, and that's fucking frightening and dark. And these were just kind of like mutant dogs, unclear. And then like another moment of things not being clear to me. Were they like making them pop into existence? Because it sure seemed like it.
Couldn't believe that. I was like, they have
Whereas that that doesn't
magic
make sense
summoning
to me.
abilities that are
No.
like well beyond any science.
I would have liked to
can
see a scene
imagine.
of them coming out of a tube or something. Like that would
Yeah.
make sense. Like they're in a tube underground, they shoot them up just like they do the tributes, and now they're up there. Instead, they like pop into existence, it seems like, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
So,
and they just
yeah,
look like muscle dogs. They're like big muscle dogs.
Yeah, they it was weird, and then also like unclear as to like what they were doing. At times, it really seemed like the gamekeepers were just trying to kill them, whereas it was I don't know. Katniss at least was interpreting it more to like controlling their movements and forcing them into certain zones, forcing them to confront each other. So it was a little more clear for me in the book as to the purpose of the gamekeepers and what they were trying to do. Here it just seemed like random dogs they loosed on them,
Yeah.
and like that kills Thresh. Which like how fucking pissed would you be if you were from Thresh's like district and he did so well and he made it all the way to the end and all of a sudden the gamekeepers are just like, we'll leave some dogs on him, fuck him.
Well, I was thinking about this when Katniss was like such a big threat in the games and everybody's going for her. And like they just start chucking fireballs at her. I'm like, what if one of these takes her out? Like that's so unfair. And I know that like that's part of the game is that they are unfair, but that's ridiculous. Like just to target people with fireballs.
That's when you get riots, man.
Yeah.
Get people who actually enjoy something and get them pissed off. You get a riot.
Yeah.
You got to be careful with that. They also shortened Kato's death quite a bit. In the book, he was wearing some sort of like magic armor, not magic. It was a high tech armor, and it was protecting him.
+1,
Yeah.
light armor of some kind.
Exactly. He was immune to a lot of the hits, and then like when he gets knocked down into the dogs, like he's getting killed for like an hour or something, right? It takes a long time. He's just down there dying for a long fucking time. Another very horrific death. That is softened a little bit for the movie.
Yeah, this kind of brings us to the end. I think
Romeo and
I
Juliet
liked-
moment.
Yeah, I like that they did this again. I think it works just as well. I like the
Smart.
moment of Crane like kind of grab, like you hear like the microphone like give that feedback, and he's like trying to grab it quickly of him saying like wait,
Yeah,
stop.
don't do that.
Like that's showing like that the Capitol is like losing control in some ways, and they're not as
Yeah.
organized and put together as they would have you believe. And then the moment where
That's
they
all
leave
right of the book. So
Yeah.
credit to Suzanne Collins.
and I like that they leave the berries there. I don't think that that's from the book. The putting him Seneca.
Well, no,
'cause we don't
see
Crane.
anything outside of Katniss's perspective. So
Right. So putting him in the room with the Nightlock bulls is as a symbol of being like, this is, you fucked us, now you have to die this way. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to watch the second movie to find out if he actually died. We don't see him again after that, so I kind of assumed he did.
I think he's dead. Yeah.
Interesting, man. And the Romeo and Juliet moment at the end, I think it's a smart way. It does so many things, right? It's working on multiple levels, which is a sign of great writing to me. And that it's sparking rebellion. It's showing that they are staying true to themselves. It's a fuck you to the Capitol. It's also furthering the romance between these two characters because, of course, Romeo and Juliet are tragic romantic teens who die. Spoilers for Shakespeare. And to have this moment where they are potentially going to do the same thing, it just makes a ton of sense. I think all that's left to do is to choose book or movie and wrap this thing up. What do you think?
Let's do it. Yeah. I guess I'll start. I'm
Okay.
pretty undecided about this. I think that for this case, for the purposes of the podcast, I think I'm going to take the movie here. And I think it's just because like it launches this mega franchise, which I don't remember the ending of very much. And I think at like nearing the end, it got weird with the part one, part two thing. And I don't remember how people feel about that. That the podcast wouldn't exist without adaptations, right? And I think seeing mega bestsellers get adapted is something that brings people into adaptations in the first place. This is what people are interested in. These are the first adaptations you'll see, are these big, kind of more broad ones, especially and especially for that demographic that they're targeting. Like this might be some of the first adaptations that some of these younger audiences are seeing, and then they're like, I want to read the book so I have better context. And I just like the idea of seeing like a Jennifer Lawrence, Woody Harrelson, Donald Sutherland, like all these big name actors come together and take something like this really seriously, and the costuming, the way that they were able to like evoke the Capitol in ways, and then also show like some of the brutality that you wouldn't expect to have made it into a PG-13 cut. It's just, obviously all credit to Suzanne Collins, but I'm going to take the movie here just because I think that it puts it into a package that's very digestible for anyone, even more accessible than a really short novel.
So I like that you have sort of multiple layers to your reasoning there, including a meta one about the nature of adaptations in this podcast. So I'll come at mine from the same way. I'm going to choose the book. I've touched on several reasons here why I thought the interiority of Katniss, the limited perspective, I think works really well in the book. It lets me fill in a lot of the details in a way that was always going to probably be better than an adaptation could pull off. And that's the reason that I think a lot of people tend to say that the book was better when you ask them about adaptations. Like I talk to people about adaptations outside of the podcast all the time because I mention I do a podcast about adaptations. The number one response I get is, "Oh yeah, the book's always better." Like that's like the accepted knowledge. And the reason I think it's accepted is because people provide all these like rich world building and thoughts and perspectives, and they have no budget for their design, so anything can look as good as they want it to in their imagination. And this is I think on a meta level just a clear example to me of this was a solid adaptation and it did everything you mentioned, but also I think the fans of the book are probably the kind of people who are going to stick by the book and say this was better because you can read this book and really imagine something spectacular that maybe isn't quite delivered on here. Even though I do recognize that it's a solid one and I did enjoy it. And I don't even know if that was true previously because I think I really got caught up in the spectacle of it and the performances. But
Yeah.
I think this time around I've come back to the book being better. So that's where I'll weigh. I think it's obviously also appropriate for the podcast to have us do both sides of it here.
And I like what you brought up there with the idea of like that audience is going to be very passionate. People who read the book first, especially.
Yeah.
But I did too, just to add to my point, thinking about like the zeitgeist and the way that like made the odds be ever in your favor. Katniss Everdeen, the girl on fire, the Stanley Tucci like famous line, and the Effie Trinket stuff, like just seeing her become a meme like she has and what she means to like the overall zeitgeist and how it's like it's in the culture, it's in the everyone's consciousness at this point. So I guess credit to the movie for that as well, for being iconic, I would say at this point.
Yeah, great project. This one was a lot of fun. If you enjoyed us covering it and you want to hear us cover more stuff like it in the future, let us know in the form of a rating interview. Let us know that you listened to this episode. We'd love to hear from you in that way on whatever platform you chose to listen on. And if you're on YouTube, give the video a like, make sure to subscribe, and you'll be notified whenever we have new things coming out.
And be sure to connect with us on all other social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Follow us on any of that. We would love to interact on there.
And if you would like to support us in another way, we have a Patreon. And on that Patreon right now, we have a poll. If you're listening to this on the 30th, then you can still have time to join up to Patreon and cast your vote. It's down to 4 final projects. It is My Best Friend's Exorcism, Psycho, To Kill a Mockingbird, or Crazy Rich Asians. One of those 4 projects is going to be our next project. And right now we don't know. I think it's still like a dead heat. So great time to get onto our Patreon and cast your vote. We also have bonus content on there. So keep an eye out for that. And we'd love to have you.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it for the Hunger Games. This was a fun one. I can't tell you what our next project's going to be. As I mentioned, it's still up in the air, but we're approaching Christmas time, so we'll be choosing, a Christmas project to cap off the year. Oh, and then we'll be doing our last looks, which is our true final episode of the year, where we take a look back at everything we covered. So, stay tuned for that, and until next time.
Keep adapting.